one way is through money, and another way is through respect, and a third way is by avoiding regulations and other kinds of activities that will prohibit them from doing it. So those are the points I wanted to make in this rather wide-ranging thing where we started with a song, and maybe there's another verse left. Let's see. The past may weigh upon all of our minds, but we sometimes can use what we've left behind. We may seek inspiration from things in the past to create something new that we hope will last. Not lost forever. There can be music and dance. Some people revive them, enjoy them, and change them, and they may keep on doing so for good or not. And that's, of course, one of the questions that is for all of us to find out, perhaps be actors in the process of. Thanks. So, you may have a few questions. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Yes?
What were the main qualities or characteristics about the Suyá that attracted you to them in your research?
My original research, some people, ethnomusicologists have several ways that they choose a research site. And one is they hear the music and they love it. Or they learn how to play it and they love it and they want to know more about it. So they create a research project to go and learn more about it. And that happens with people who hear Cuban song. It happens with people who hear Invita music, some piano music we call it. They hear it and they say, that's amazing, I want to know more about it. And there are quite a few people who write books about that because they follow their musical hearts. I had a question. And my question was I wanted to know what the relationship was between the music that people made and their vision of the world, their understanding of the cosmos, of the whole world, the universe, and also the way they organize themselves into groups. Because if going back to Karl Marx and Max Weber, I don't know if you've ever heard of either of those, they were both sociologists and political scientists. Marx thought that the most important thing was the means of production, the economic base of society, and that music, and that shaped other things like music and art and other things. Whereas Max Weber and religion, and Max Weber said, no, perhaps it's those values and ideas that actually shape the economic structures and economic processes. And so the question, and my question, well, where's music in all this? And so I had to find a place, and I wanted to study it in a non-capitalist society, because I could have studied it here in Fresno. I could have gone to Bakersfield and studied country music, which is great, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted to go to a place where no one had really thought about this issue in that particular way, and I had to find a group. And the Suyá stood out because they had never had missionaries, so their cosmology was still active and in place, and they never converted. And they also had never sold their labor because there was no money where they were. There were no stores. When I first went, there was literally no way to buy anything or get anything except if somebody brought it to you as a gift. And they sang. And so that's the reason I went there. And no one else had been there. So, well, if you get a chance, why not go where no one else has been? Yes?
So having lived with them for so long and observing their lifestyle, was there a moment where you shifted from being an American, that you shifted your state of mind and your lifestyle and adopted some principles and practices of the Suyá?
Well, I've learned a lot from them. I don't think I think most of the principles I went in with that I still operate by. My wife did more than I did, because I was being an anthropologist. And no matter what, you have to keep taking notes. No matter what happens, somebody dies, you have to note down who's burying them. And there was a moment toward the end where I couldn't do it anymore. But before that, I did spend an awful lot of time there doing that. And it's hard. It's hard to keep on writing about things you care deeply about. Things everybody else is crying and you're sitting there taking notes. It's sort of like there's a cartoon of Dante crossing the river Styx, and all the souls are there mourning because they're about to go to hell. And I'm just gathering material for a book, he's saying it very calmly, as he's being rowed across the river Styx. And I felt like that sometimes. And so it is sometimes hard to be an anthropologist in situations. On the other hand, I was able, all that detail I had when they invaded the ranches and took them back by force, my data was really the basis of what proved that it was their territory in the first place. No one believed them, but I'd already, because they were interested parties, but I was an interested party, I already published it. And so the things that I thought were just sort of dry anthropology turned out to be in their getting the land that they currently have in that territory. So you never know. So I think there is something to be said for research. Yeah?
Do you and your wife speak their language?
We
And
do.
How many of them speak English, if any?
None speak English, and when I got there, practically none spoke Portuguese. Two men could speak a little bit of trade Portuguese, and others knew soap, and I want hammock or something like that. But in terms of asking a question, that wasn't going to work to do research. You have to be able to talk to people, and I think if you really you should make the effort to talk to people in the language that they're really born with and familiar with, because then you're doing the translating and they're not. And so I spent a lot of time learning their language too, because no one had studied it before. There was no grammar, there was no teacher, there was nothing, and they didn't have enough fluency to teach me. So I was that all pointing and learning. And after 9 months, there was sort of a moment of 9 months. And it's a really long time when you're sitting in a village all that time. In 9 months, I could finally understand them well enough to ask a question about what they just said as they were saying it, instead of having to go tick, 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 and then come back with the questions that are much too late. And so that's a long time. And fortunately, if you don't all have to do that. It's possible to learn the language before you go to a place in many cases, and it's also possible to work with people who speak English. You just have to be careful if you're working with your own language that what is the same word doesn't necessarily have the same meaning for different people. So you really have to be very aware of the different meanings that people use on the same word when you're studying in your own society. And I was pretty good. They treated me like a 12-year-old. In fact, they told me I was a 12-year-old, just to make it very clear. Because I could hunt and fish sort of good. I could speak okay, because I could be understood, but I didn't have the great fluency in oratory that a man would have, especially a man with a lip disc. So I was sort of okay. And that was my high point. And since then, I think I've degenerated to being about a 9-year-old or a 5-year-old, because you go away and you forget language. But when I was there doing the most intense research, I was okay. My wife was better. But yeah, language learning is really important. Yes?
Hi, thank you very much, Dr. Seeger. I wanted to just find out from you what your process was like entering their world, and how they might have received you and even conceived of your project to want to be there and study them, and what that interaction was like, and why they might have even allowed you to do so.
Yeah, why would they let me in? I mean,
Yeah.
if somebody knocked on your door and said, "Hello, good evening, I'm an ethnomusicologist. I want to come in and live with you for 2 years. Is that okay? And what's for dinner?" Yeah. If you said, just imagine somebody doing that. Well, that's sort of what I did to them. I arrived through the intermediary of the Brazilian who made peace with them 12 years before. Because they made peace with Brazilians about 12 years before I got there. And they trusted him, and he'd helped them when they were sick and things like that. So he had some credibility with me. He said, some Americans are coming, and they're going to learn about your language and your music, and you should treat them well, because they're going to write a book and I'm going to read the book. And he also said, Americans, they're very fierce people. They drop firebombs on people. This is doing the Vietnam War. They drop napalm on people. And so you got to watch out with these Americans. And then he also said, what I didn't know, and he also said they didn't have to have me, quite frankly. And they decided after some thought to allow me to come. The chief said, I was really tired. I didn't want to see any more whites. I hate whites. I didn't want to have anything to do with you. Yeah, I know this years later, 12 years later. So I didn't want to have anything to do with you, but I spoke to another chief, and he said, sometimes these whites can be useful for things. So maybe you should let him in, and maybe he'll be able to help you when you need him later on. And that was the bet that they had. So that was one of the reasons I found out many years later that they took us in at all. And that may explain why there was so little food on the. I had to go hunting and fishing, because they were making an effort, but they weren't going to make a huge effort to have us there. It was an interesting time. It was hard to move in. We slowly moved in. We have people arriving who don't speak your language, who don't know how to do anything that you need to do to make a living there. You have to have a fair amount of patience, and if you're doing it, you have to have a lot of humor, and a lot of sort of willingness to be the butt of all the jokes. I was the butt of jokes for years, and I think one of the reasons they liked having us there was we were first very musical, and they liked that, and second, could laugh at ourselves, because that was always fun too. So that helped, and then and there was a power structure within this that made it possible, but in the field I was much less powerful than they were. They had all the control. At one point they said, "Oh, we don't like it anymore. You're speaking English. You're speaking your language to each other. We want you to speak our language all the time, so we know what you're saying, because we think you're talking about us." Well, we weren't talking about them, but so all of a sudden we had to stop speaking English, and feed you if you don't go hunting and fishing every other day. So much for my plans for doing anthropology every day. I learned a lot about the fish and the animals, and my wife, you know, so they had all the cards, and they could throw us out anytime they wanted to. My parents, you know, the Americans aside, the only time this came up, really, the power came up, was they said, if our enemies down the river attack us and kill you, will your father drop a bomb on their village, or a fire? Will your father drop a fire on their village? That was a real tough question, because if you say no, it means your father really doesn't care much about you. If you say yes, they might kill you and say they did it. So I was talking about that. No, I said, you know, my father is so unpredictable. You can't tell. Sometimes he'll drop bombs on everybody, and sometimes he won't. And that was my best guess. My father's a pacifist and would never kill anybody. He suffered a fair amount for his pacifism. But you know, so you got all these strange questions, and you tried to deal with them. Fieldwork is really fun. I mean, it's fun because of all the things you suddenly learn. You're going along in a conversation, and bang, someone says something you never expected. And it's, you suddenly understand something that you never imagined even asking the question about. That's the fun part of doing research. And there's nothing quite like it. And that's why we talk so much about our field work when we're talking, I think, as ecologists and anthropologists, is because it's a really exciting time. And there's a lot of plain, hard grunt work that comes before and after it and during it, of taking notes and reading for years and years and years in libraries and at home and things like that. But I feel that I've learned a lot from the Kinseji, and they have been very gracious in teaching me, and I've tried to sort of reciprocate in all the ways I can think of, including by giving them credit and money. Yes. Well, I've got a question back here. Yes.
How are their leaders chosen? Is it by birth, or do they vote? How do they choose the chief?
How do they choose the chief? It's hereditary to a certain extent. But it's not necessarily the first voice, the one who can speak the most. Because the chief has to be somebody who can speak well. And so some people speak and some people are shy. So there's usually the son of a chief. Now there's political leaders. There are two types of leaders, and there have been for as long as I can trace back. One type is a political leader, who is what we would call a chief, leads raids, organizes things, and deals with the whites. And then there's a ceremonial leader who knows the songs, and that's by knowledge. And it has nothing to do with heredity. In fact, they're usually they're not related to power. It's political power and knowledge are two things that are quite separate, yet they're both critical to them in how the society is going to work. Any other questions? Yes, you had. I'm sorry.
Yes, that's okay. So thank you again for your beautiful talk. My question is, while you were on the field, did you have some very interesting dreams? And did you hear any songs in the dreams? Not too necessarily connected with any, you know, I don't believe in God or anything like that.
No, it's a really good question because, in fact,
because I mean, on the field, when I was on the field, I did hear this very, 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 very interesting bird song in the middle of the night, and nobody else had heard it except for the elder of the community. So,
well, you know, I dropped dead in my hammock when we slept in hammocks like they did. And so and even to this day when I go visit them, I don't remember my dreams. They always ask me in the morning, what did you dream? Because they have a whole symbolism of dreams, and if you dream of a certain animal, it means they're going to have a terrible day fishing. Or if you dream of some, it's sort of opposite. If you dream of a beautiful woman, it means you're not going to find any girlfriends or something like that. So it's sort of, there's an opposite thing in the dreams. And other indigenous groups learn music in their dreams, but the Kinseji don't seem to learn in their dreams. It really does come from walking in the woods or listening, from hearing, conscious hearing. But dreams are very important in other indigenous groups throughout the Americas, because that's often that state of semi-wakeness, and your mind is alert to it. It's another type of reality, and that's certainly one of the sort of alternate realities that you get to is in the waking, sleeping moment. And that's where many people say they hear music. Yeah, sure.
Are some of these traditional dances and ceremonies like chemically enhanced, for hearing like through the forest and things like that? Is there some ayahuasca type of element that they use?
Going back Brazil, the ayahuasca, we got back here the first image. Where's that map? The Indians of Brazil and of South America in general have been there for a couple thousand years, many thousands of years in some cases, and they have a tremendously detailed knowledge of hallucinogens, the effect of plants on people, of all kinds, not all necessarily hallucinogens, but certainly effects of plants. And they mostly are on the areas of Brazil that sort of are along where Brazil meets the other countries. The Suyá themselves took no hallucinogens, originally drank no fermented beverages, except for some but when I got there, they'd already learned about them from another Indian group, so they made their own chicha sort of thing. And so the way they got high was by singing for many hours in a row, and I think so they altered their consciousness by singing and moving and dancing, but not just a little bit, but for 10 hours or 12 hours in a row, day after day. And so that was how they altered their consciousness, but there are some very sophisticated mixtures that you can make, not just of Banisteriopsis caapi, but the Indians in the region know what other plants to add to it to make them even more colorful or more beautiful or whatever. And they talk about people coming about transforming and visiting, and it's not just the Indians. The whites have also learned from the Indians. The vice mayor of a town way up on the border with Peru told me, yes, we call it the poor man's cinema. We take this stuff and then we lie on our beds and we see these wonderful, beautiful things. He said, I've never left this city, but I've been to New York, and I've been to Sao Paulo, because the vice mayor was taking hallucinogens. And that sort of surprised me, but I guess it shouldn't. It's a regional thing. It is, in fact, a very real way of having a tremendously mind-altering experience. And when you're way out in a small town at the end of Brazil, it's kind of handy, perhaps, to have a cinema, because otherwise there wasn't much going around. That was before the internet, of course. And, they may have the internet now, I'm not sure, but before, the only way you could find a color dream was to make it yourself. Yes?
What are the implications of those so-called mind-altering experiences for those people?
For some of them, it's many indigenous peoples think that there's another level of reality, and that so we're living at one level, and there's another spiritual level, and you can get there. Some groups say by taking these hallucinogens. That's how you make the connection with this other. You sort of travel to this other level of reality. In the case of the Kinsenji, that other level of reality is right here on the ground, so you can get there by walking in the woods if you have the special ability to hear, or paddling up the river or something. Yeah.
So how do these people gain legitimacy in this world?
Pardon?
How would these people gain legitimacy in a world that is fighting against, there's like the war on drugs and all this stuff?
It's really hard. Ayahuasca, which is a common name for the hallucinogen we were talking about, is actually protected as a religious by sort of religious laws protecting religion, because it's at the heart of what is now called a religion. And Santo Daime, there are ayahuasca takers all over the place. You can take it. You can find ayahuasca sort of ayahuasca shamans and people like that. I know in Los Angeles, probably around here. But the Indians themselves have a certain autonomy from most of that, so they usually don't get caught up in the drug raids that happen. And of course, all the coca chewing Indians in the Andes get in trouble because they can't plant coca. Yes.
If you had heard any songs, would you tell us? You wouldn't tell us.
Heard what?
Any songs while you were on the field?
If I heard any song? No, I would tell you. I'd be happy to tell you. In my dreams, I heard none. In
I
real
just
life,
wanted
yes.
to know if there's a one that you need to keep it secret.
No,
or not.
this is interesting because some in Australia the songs are often secret, and they're property of a certain part of the community, clan or something like that. Nothing is secret for the Suyá. So I can tell you everything that I've told you. There are a couple of things they never recorded for me because it's a song that is so dangerous that if anybody in another village in the region heard it, they would attack them and kill them all. So it's a really outrageous song, and they never sang it for me. And I can only tell you it exists, but I can't even. I would never tell you if I knew it, but I don't even know it because they already decided that there are some things that were too important and too secret not to tell me, but not so secret they wouldn't tell me they existed. But in general, this is public stuff. some of these things about visiting spirits is a little more private, but it's public, and so I'm free to talk about it, which is not the case if I were working with Candomblé, for example, where
Right.
there are secrets in the African Brazilian religion called Candomblé, and there are also secrets in Australia that they don't tell anybody either, because they're really the property of a group of people. I recommend not studying something that's secret, because then you never can talk about it, and yet it's very attractive to study something that's secret because you want to know what it is. But once you're initiated, then you're forbidden from talking about it. It's really hard to be a scholar if you can't talk about or write about what you've spent so many years learning. So it is a problem. Yes.
Can you tell us something briefly about, in terms of archivists, with all the changing technologies and a lot of the recordings that have been deposited that are in these older formats, kind of the challenges that are facing particularly audio archivists?
I had a verse about that I seem to have skipped over, or I didn't write it. I can't remember which it was, but I thought I wrote it. We're facing a huge crisis in preserving our own past, and you would think that's so crazy since there's so much internet out there, and the cloud is so big. Couldn't we fit all the world's music into it? But in fact, most of it's recorded on tapes. Could be digital tapes, but tapes that self-destruct. The layers sort of fight. The layers that come apart, and we don't have enough tape recorders to play all those tapes and transfer them to digits. The tape recorder companies stopped making them. We don't have enough money to copy them, and we have about 15 more years, and then none of them will be playable anymore. And so most archives are fighting a battle to try to what's really important to save and what we're simply going to have to let go into oblivion because we don't have the funding and we don't have the equipment and we don't have the ability to do that. Ethnomusicologists are trying very hard to make sure that what we're saving is not just the most popular music and the money the stuff that makes the most money, but also the diversity of the sounds of the world, and that's what I argue for. That's what I fight for. That's what I try to get funds for. But we're in a very awkward time, and most of the digital equipment you're using is also changing so fast that it won't play back on the equipment that's going to be available in 20 years. It's going to be incompatible with anything, and so we have a huge technological incompatibility problem, even with things as recently as 15 years ago. And so most archives are collecting equipment as well as collecting recordings, but even still, we aren't sure we can play back. The digital audio tape that we all thought was great, it was a cassette-sized digital tape that held a huge amount of information. It doesn't play after as little as 10 years. And so you have some places were putting a lot of stuff on that kind of storage and it didn't work. So there's it's a big problem. And as we're talking about looking at the past and sort of recovering the past, there's a lot of the past that we're not going to have. In fact, a vice president for Google said in some interview, he said, if you really care about your photographs, print them out. He said, we don't know what's going to happen with the internet. We don't know what's going to happen with the various formats. We do know that if it's a hard copy, you can actually scan it and you can get it back. That's very interesting. And if you think with the amount of cyber hacking, and especially the potential for cyber warfare, it's possible that all our clouds are going to be eliminated all of a sudden. And then where would we be with all the material we put aside for our heirs in the future, or for the future of our own communities and the things we care deeply about? It's a real problem, and it's not a problem that is going to be solved by any individual person, but it's a problem that needs to be solved by some larger entity thinking that that's a serious problem. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, I think you.
Me?
Yep.
Oh, okay, good, great.
If you got a question, just raise your hand so I see you. But.
So archiving. How do you make decisions about what to edit and not to edit? So, for example, I had a CD album of my field recordings of this group of British people that I work with. Like you, I was and am very much an advocate of that community, and this is the way I give back to the community because I worked with them for the last 15 years. In order to present them in a way that would be respectable, as the idea of respectable music might be understood by the world, I we did do a lot of editing with their permission, but, I did that. So, what are your thoughts about that? I mean, where is it, how do we make these decisions? To edit, or not to edit?
Well, there's sort of two things. One is an archive where you put the original as it sounded when you recorded.
Right.
Another is making a recording that's for distribution.
Right.
Because very often those things that you made at the moment aren't, the sound quality's not good enough, or it's so diffuse that it's longer than a CD, and so there's no way to present it
Right.
sensibly. And so that's where editing comes in. And I think there you just have to go with the people who you don't want to edit by yourself.
Right.
You want to go with them and edit it. I produced my first project. They asked me to produce an LP of theirs for them, and the first thing I said, well, what don't you want on it? And then I worked with what I thought Brazilians could, how I could present their music, the Brazilians. Then we talked about how much of it had to be there to be
Right.
structurally significant units, and how it was going to work. Because as they themselves say when they're in a discussion that was filmed by them, the whites don't understand they don't have the patience to listen to our music. They get bored listening to our music, so we have to present it to them in shorter bits. But we want to hear the whole thing, and so that's part of the problem you have with if you're producing a CD, especially because it only holds 70 minutes, and so you're stuck with a format. You're also stuck with people expecting to have 3 to 5 minute lengths
Right.
of pieces.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's what I did also.
Yeah, I think we all sort of muddle through on those things, but I think the people we do it for usually appreciate it, and the audience usually appreciates it. My feeling is a CD in a commercial project like that is an opportunity for people to discover it and then go further themselves. I always think that the purpose of a CD is not to make money by selling it,
No.
but to start somebody on a journey of discovery. If they're really sort of moved by it, then they can go hear live performances. They can go learn how to play it, then, if it's possible to play it, or sing it or whatever, and they can change their lives, become a musicologist or an ethnomusicologist or an anthropologist or a performer of it. And all those things are important, and they can be sparked by recording. When I was running Folkways Records, I would get constant emails from people who say, I started because of a recording on Folkways that I heard, and then I went and studied the Temi, or I went and did this. And I get letters saying, I didn't know I had a tradition, a woman wrote, a Jamaican woman, until I got this recording, and I suddenly realized, I know that stuff, and that's my tradition. And she was so excited that she'd been working in Washington, D.C. with no idea that what she knew actually was something and had value and had a history and maybe a future. So there's something important about recordings, whether you hear them on the internet, on Spotify, or you go and find them elsewhere. They can move people deeply. And I was moved when I was a kid by certain types of music. And that's one of the reasons I agreed to run a record company, is I know that music moves people. And that's one of the reasons I play the instruments, is because I know that people can experience things as they're singing with me or performing or whatever that is important to them and may change in some way aspects of their lives to direct them towards new discoveries and new experiences. Speaking of traditions and change, they're both sort of constantly happening, all of us, and often in music, but also in other things, dance, sometimes poetry reading, and other things. Anyway, I think we have to leave the room.
Yes.
So
Thank
it's
you
probably
so
a good
much.
time to stop.